I wanted to play the game with my friends. I did want to make it better, but I wasn't emotionally prepared to actually authentically handle the feedback. Hello there, I'm Michael Willer, and I discovered role-playing games in my 20s and have been making up for lost time ever since. To start, I have a personal story to share. So I discovered a couple years ago that I have an experience called RSD, or rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is essentially experiencing the feeling of rejection even if there isn't any rejection occurring, and that feeling might hit you as like pain or anger or other like negative emotions, and it's incredibly intense. It just feels so intense, almost like a fight or flight response, that oftentimes you'll find yourself avoiding doing the things or putting yourself in the situations where you might be hearing from people things that might feel judgmental or any other sort of form of rejection, even when it's not actually happening. And to be perfectly honest, that is why I ran my campaign-style playtests at the beginning of this whole thing. I wanted to play the game with my friends. I did want to make it better, but I wasn't emotionally prepared to actually authentically handle the feedback. And so I kind of just didn't really ask for feedback. I allowed people to give me feedback, and then occasionally I would sort of make a targeted request, but mostly I avoided it. And in a creative, collaborative environment, this is pretty devastating. This is like ruins the sort of forward momentum and collaborative spirit, the sort of back and forth that you need to build something with other people. It basically disappears when RSD is hanging over your head. Now, I know this doesn't apply to everybody, and trust me, if this is like a foreign concept to you, you're one of the lucky ones. You're a step ahead of the rest of us, and enjoy that feeling. For those of you that are relating to what I'm saying, it took a number of life experiences happening all at the same time for me to realize what I was losing, what I was missing out on by letting this feeling kind of run my creative process and run my life. And the only way out of it for me was to just say, screw it. I'm going to start running these short form playtests, and I'm going to run it with as many people as I possibly can. And it's going to be friends, but it's also going to be a lot of like acquaintances and people that I don't really know and trust that well. And I'm going to authentically ask them for their feedback. And it might be good, it might be terrible, I don't know, but it's sort of like immersion therapy. You have to make a conscious choice to confront it head on and not let it run you. Maybe you're like me and you have a game that looks good on paper and even runs well in your head, but theory only gets you so far. The only way to know for certain is playtesting. So how do you approach it, and what should you hope to get out of it? You can find the answers in the word itself. Play, first and foremost, you want to play your game. That's the whole point. Get your game in front of players, because love it or hate it, game devs are always going to regard a game differently from your average players, and it's vital to get their authentic reactions. Set the expectations for your test and then watch closely, because the second half is just as important. Testing. We're doing this to make the game better, and that can't happen without some semblance of a testing environment. This is a safe space to try out weird and new ideas without judgment, where you can experiment, and everyone understands that if something goes wrong or doesn't work, it's actually preferred that you speak up and say so during feedback, rather than just pretending like you had a good time and then moving on. And sometimes, just seeing the game in action will spark new ideas. Now let's talk about the different types of playtests. Generally, you'll have long-form campaigns versus one-shots and quick adventures. There can be benefits and drawbacks to each depending on what you want to achieve and what sort of players you have at your disposal. More on that later. I did my playtesting backwards for my game, and you probably don't want to make the same mistakes, so learn from mine. I started with the long-form campaigns because I just wanted to play my game with my friends and wasn't thinking critically enough about the feedback and testing aspects. When we started doing rapid, short-form testing this year, the absolute quantum leaps in design eclipsed anything we'd seen before that. Rapid iteration, especially early in your design process, like literally as soon as you have a playable system, is vital to your game's growth. In the spirit of doing it backwards, let's talk about campaign-style playtesting first. I've run 2 extended games with largely consistent groups, each lasting a year or longer. Starting with the pros, it's definitely the closest match to how your game is intended to be played, so that's something. It'll show you if your game works as a full experience and if it accommodates all the things that players want to be able to do. You might also notice the particular mechanics, classes, and playstyles that players are gravitating towards, and also the ones they tend to avoid. So a great example of this is early on in my game's development, I had a class that was very gadget focused, and it had a whole list of different things it could do. It was sort of like Spellcaster, but with technology. And I never got players picking that class. They would pick all of the others through various campaigns, and I did a handful of short one-shot tests early on. But basically everyone was avoiding it, or they would say, oh, it looks kind of cool, but they never actually played it. And so finally overhauled it one last time, having seen all of the things that people were actually gravitating towards. And that overhaul is what we took into this recent iteration of rapid short form playtesting. And it has been picked every single test. So basically, if you have this longer environment to see how people gravitate and interact with your game, it really can lead you towards oh, if I make this choice, it will have this effect. And then you eventually start to find the things that you really want to have in your game that is going to engage your players the best way possible. And finally, if your game has a unique setting, you'll get a sense of whether it's fully fleshed out and alive, and if the players feel they can inhabit it and roleplay comfortably. Games that rely on players not only learning the rules, but also the lore can be a tough sell, so you'll really get a clear sense of where your world lands based on your players' actions and character. Now let's get into the gameplay cons, and there are a few. You might find yourself struggling to balance the game design process with running the campaign. That's always a tough one. Making drastic rules changes can derail character builds, and implementing a mechanic that works poorly can lead to lasting story ramifications and tension at your table. That's the worst. I have done that before. It also gets increasingly difficult to remember your own rules when they've changed dozens of times in one campaign. I have a pretty good memory for rules, but when you have, a whole bunch of different versions of your own game in your head, it eventually starts to kind of blend together. And then when players look to you for answers and you don't have a really clear, immediate first answer, that can be kind of tough. That can create sort of a lack of confidence, which will slowly erode the game over time. And that's obviously not ideal. So how do you address all of this? First and most important, set the expectations for your group up front. They should know that this is primarily a testing process, and as such, everything is subject to change. Ideally, a long-form test occurs later in your game's development once the core mechanics are locked, so players won't get totally thrown for a loop by such a foundational change. And when you do make changes, be transparent about what they are and why they're happening. Some players might feel shortchanged if they suddenly have their character sheet broken because you nerfed something and they don't know why and they don't understand. There are also significant cons in the feedback side of things. You'll get a large quantity of feedback, but from a very small audience. So lots, if not all of your mechanics will get attention, but the limited perspectives aren't likely to be sufficient all on their own. This could easily result in you unintentionally tailoring your game for a specific playstyle that's not actually representative of the average gamer. To that point, it's a good idea to know your target audience and make choices with them in mind. Don't accidentally create a game so niche that only the people in your group will ever want to play it. Now, on to short-form playtesting. At this point, we've run a couple dozen sessions for about 10 different groups of players, including for total strangers at Dice Tower West this year, which was an absolute blast. And let me tell you, the experience is night and day from running campaigns. The pros are that you'll get targeted feedback based on whatever mechanics you wanted people to be focused on, because you designed the session that way. This is great when you have an idea of how things should feel during the game, but no way to really understand how your mechanics are creating an experience, and you just need to see it play out for you. Also, players will latch onto the most specific and seemingly random things, and that's the beauty of it. Having so many different eyes on your game gives you lots of ideas, and good, bad, or ugly, those ideas will get you thinking creatively about your game in new ways. That's ideal. Different players will approach the same challenges differently, sometimes wildly differently, and oftentimes this variety exposes flaws and oversights in your designs. You can also discover interesting interactions you might not have considered otherwise. So a perfect example of this, in our game, we use a dice pool system, but it also has step dice. So you would have like D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. And then whatever you're rolling, you want to try and roll, higher dice and more of them to have a better chance of success. And we have a mechanic where if you have, let's say your normal dice pool is 2d6, we have a mechanic called hypershifting where you can take those 2d6, hypershift it up to 2d8. Temporarily just for that roll. And this can happen a number of different ways based on whether or not you're using like cooperation, team play, spending a special resource to do so. There's a few different ways to do it. But we were finding that players really weren't doing that, especially like in combat where we were trying to kind of really focus the playtesting at Dice Tower West. We were noticing that people were doing plenty of damage already. And so hypershifting your damage roll, which is actually the same as our attack roll, didn't really make sense. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't worth the effort. So we made 2 tweaks to rebalance that mechanic and kind of open it up a little bit for the Dice Tower West playtests. We lowered the overall damage being dealt across the board so that you kind of wanted to like strive a little harder to hit a little bigger. And then we also unlocked the ability to stack multiple hypershifts. It used to be that you could only have one source of hypershift and that was it. And then once we did that, we discovered that like players at the table, and I didn't tell them to do this, they just sort of found it on their own, that if they could, coordinate and get a hypershift, they could potentially stack a whole bunch together. And then, if there's one enemy that has like really high armor that's been like wailing on everyone, it's like sort of hard to like take them down and hit them, they can coordinate, get these big hypershifts going, potentially go from like D6s up to D12s for this one epic moment. And it was easily the most exciting moment of that game at any point running it for the entire 8 years that I've been like making this game. It was so much fun at the table and continues to be the highlight moment at every subsequent playtest with different groups of players. And that all came around because we basically just said, hey, we're going to be in this environment where we're going to have a bunch of new players. Let's see if we can really focus in on this one area where it feels like the game isn't working as intended. And because cooperative is like one of the pillars of our game, as we describe it, it's scrappy cooperative space opera. We hit that cooperative pillar because that's how you're getting those hypershifts in a fight, at least. So like a phenomenal usage of playtesting that I didn't see coming. I just sort of said, let's try these things. And then the results were incredible. And we hit like the perfect balance for our fight mechanics after that. And like haven't touched it since because it really felt like lightning in a bottle, like unbelievable results. So what are the cons for short form playtesting? First and foremost, it's a high volume of people, which means different schedules, needs, personalities to balance. Coordinating groups can be challenging on all its own. We all know this, like you're just sort of adding many, many different groups together to try and do that for, and it can suck. You're gonna need to create and run a lot of different one-shots with lots of different players to touch your entire game, which is a major undertaking. It's just a lot. If you're working solo, I highly recommend recruiting a partner to help you run sessions or at least like take notes. If they know the game, they can even answer questions or mentor the newbies while you're busy like actually running the game, which is a big enough job on its own. My advice is to create a place like Discord where people can gather and you can coordinate, get them into playtest groups and let them see the excitement and sort of the bigness of what you're trying to pull off. One of the best lessons I learned as a filmmaker in LA was that when you're spearheading a project, people are looking to you to be inspired. They want to feel like they're part of something exciting, and exciting to them probably means scary to you. You might be taking on a big financial risk or just an emotional risk if you're worried about being judged. Whatever the case, sharing your creativity is a vulnerable thing for a lot of people, but that's the whole point. They're showing up for you first and foremost, and then hopefully once they play your game, they'll see its merits and stick around just for that. But this all starts with you and being able to get people excited with your passion. Personally, I recommend talking about your game to anyone who will listen, so long as you know they're into role-playing games. We don't like info dumping on people without permission. And eventually you'll get someone asking you, like, so what part of your process are you in now? And you can say, hey, I'm in playtesting. Would you want to participate? If you're curious about that, let me know. Don't apply pressure like a crazy salesman. Nobody likes that. But also don't apologize for your game like taking up their time with it. Like, be proud and confident and then let them choose to opt in or not. So you've got your Discord set up and you're scoping out prospective players. Let's talk about the different kinds of players and how they can impact your testing. Every gamer approaches TTRPGs differently, but there's a few broad archetypes for this sort of playtesting space that are common enough you'll probably come across most of them. Some of these are better for testing than others, so knowing who is who can be vital. Trust me. So the glass half full category of players is eager to engage with all of the aspects of the game to figure out how they work. Under this category, we've got the model student. They learn the rules without prompting and follow them without needing any reminders. They're basically the ideal player. They keep sessions running smoothly and provide reassurance that the things that you've built are functioning as intended. They are super useful players to have in any game. However, if you only have model students in your game, it might stagnate because they're unlikely to ever push back that hard or make drastic suggestions during feedback. Another glass half full type is the min-maxer. They scour the nitty-gritty details to find the best hidden features and combos and then put them to game-breaking use. To me, it's fun to watch somebody geek out about all of the little details you've spent so much time and effort designing. My co-designer is like, that's his whole bread and butter. He loves that stuff. Min-maxers are the bloodhounds who can quickly sniff out mechanics that are exploitable because they're unbalanced or overly vague. They're best suited for long-form playtests because if they don't have the freedom to build and equip their characters the way that they want, they can't fully put their talents to use. Remember, you want your playtesters to break your game if they can. This will lead you to realize that either A, that part of the game needs fixing, which, great, that's the playtest functioning as intended, or B, that part of your game is accidentally awesome and you should lean into it. Now, the glass half empty players turn a more judgmental eye towards your game, and the ways in which it falls short of their hopes and expectations. First, we have the critic. These players quickly notice system flaws which can pave the way towards creating a smoother and more interesting gameplay experience. Sometimes these may be experienced players or even designers themselves. I've participated in other people's playtests before. It's actually a lot of fun, primarily because it's a very low stakes environment to exercise your game design muscles. But just remember, don't design someone else's game for them unless they have explicitly asked you to. There's a difference between providing feedback in a playtest and actually helping someone design their game. This is sort of a consent thing, basically. Anyway, these players who bring a wealth of knowledge and opinions to the table, suggesting bold solutions you may or may not have considered. Or these may be inexperienced players stumbling over the rules they don't fully understand, indicating that your mechanics could be overly complex or unintuitive. Both types can potentially yield helpful feedback, though sometimes at the expense of generating tension at the table, making them better suited for shorter games. Basically, sometimes those players can sort of feel like a downer, it may come across that they're being overly critical or overly, aggressive about how they think things should be done. And as long as you can kind of, manage that feedback, and I'll have some tips at the end about that, you can kind of keep track of things. Just remember, your other players are also there to have fun. And if it feels like somebody is sort of overly critical or overly criticizing the game that they're playing that maybe they're enjoying, it could kind of bring things down. So try and keep them in the shorter games just to kind of limit that exposure. And finally, we have the wish lister. These players tend to think outside the box, looking to try out cool ideas that your game might not be equipped to handle. They can help you to identify playstyles or mechanics or abilities that might be missing from your game, or to create clearer rules that prohibit such things. And they can often approach gaming from an improv or acting background, or they might come from a rules-light game where anything goes. That might be more what they're used to. They're most useful and oftentimes a lot of fun in the long-form games because they roll with the changes that you're making and might even inspire new changes. In short-form games, they may find themselves yearning for mechanics that actually do exist in your game, but are simply outside the scope of that particular playtest. And the last thing I want to talk to you about before we get to tips is how to run feedback. My advice is to start the session by explaining to everyone that this is a playtest, and it's really important that everyone get a chance to give their honest feedback on the game. But to save that feedback for the end. Write down your thoughts as they occur to you, but don't bog down the gameplay by debating mechanics. Just make sure to clarify that if players are confused about the rules, they definitely should still ask how things work. You want the session to run as smoothly as possible so that the feedback is focused on specific areas and not just it was a slog, so I don't know, do better. Not helpful. Once you end the session and transition into feedback, make sure to underscore that there's no such thing as negative feedback, because even things that might feel negative or uncomfortable to say can be vitally helpful to make the game better. Full stop here. This is the most important thing in this whole video. Please, whatever you do, take this with you. Roll out the red carpet for all feedback, whether it feels negative, positive, or neutral. If your playtesters don't feel they can speak honestly at the end of the session, then that time was wasted, and you won't get what you need to improve your game. People are often shy to start the conversation, but trust the process and let them speak up first. You'll run the gamut of responses from "I absolutely loved it" to "it's okay, but not my favorite thing" to "this mechanic actually ruined it for me," and everything in between. Your job is to be present with these ideas, and remember that sharing feedback can be just as intimidating as hearing it for some people. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of neurospicy friends because, hey, birds of a feather flock together, right? Like, sometimes social anxiety keeps people quiet, but this is the exact scenario where you want people speaking up and feeling 100% free to do so. And that starts with you and the tone you establish at your table and how you invite people to participate. So after all that, my first tip is this: give people permission to criticize your game. They might not do it, but they need to be allowed to if that's how they feel. Second tip is to keep an eye out for players who try to design your game for you. I kind of touched on this earlier, but it's rarely the case that feedback which wanders outside the scope of the session that was just played is actually helpful. Sometimes these players are just having fun, or they're realizing they enjoy game design, as sometimes they're overthinkers who don't have the full picture and are trying to imagine it out loud, usually incorrectly. Whatever the reason, they always derail the actual feedback that you want everyone focused on. So moderate your discussions and invite those players to email you any thoughts they have to go outside the scope of this session. Tip number 3, set a rigid schedule and stick to it. If you tell your players it'll be 4 hours total and the session is still going with 30 minutes left, check in with them. Tell them this is normally where you break for feedback and ask if they would prefer to finish the session or just go straight into the feedback now. You're asking them to essentially work for free since playtesting is actually a paid role in gaming, so respecting their time helps ensure that they'll come back for more. And frankly, that's really, really important because eventually you will just run out of people that you know. Tip the 4th. When you're in a longer playtest campaign, it's important to keep track of your players' chemistry at the table. I have a habit of putting my various friends from different friend groups into games together because no one group has enough people to make a full party, and this results in inconsistent group chemistry. Sometimes it's not your game that's at fault for a bad time, it's just incompatible players. And yes, that has happened in my recent playtests. You just gotta roll with it. Tip 5. To that point, while you definitely are your game's #1 champion and you should run your playtests with enthusiasm and effort, you have to be a little bit careful not to overdo it. What I mean is, if you just run a straight up fun session because you're really on that day and the fun at the table came from a lot of the GM additions like flavorful descriptions of the world and great musical cues and funny jokes and NPC moments and basically all of the other stuff that we love about role-playing that isn't to do with the game system itself, then you might accidentally get more positive feedback from your players purely because you all had so much fun. And this isn't inherently a bad thing, just remember that if a session was a total blast, it's your job still to remind them to think critically about the game mechanics. Sometimes game designing is just about being a wet blanket. Sorry. Bonus tip. There's some clear differences when you run a game for strangers, like at Dice Tower West in my case, versus your friends, but mostly it's quite similar at the end of the day. You're there to teach them something new and then help them play with it. They're looking at you to set the example at the table, and strangers will probably try to match your energy and enthusiasm as much as they're able to, whereas your friends may actually bring their own excitement without any prompting. The good news is that if you can run playtests at gaming conventions, the quality of feedback is exponentially higher, like 2 to 3 times higher. Trust me. Like I said, quantum leaps earlier, the sheer jump of the sort of fight mechanics in our game from running them at Dice Tower West this year, from the start to the finish, and that was just 3 playtests. It was as though I had run another 10 playtests online. And it's not to say that my friends aren't like super crunchy gamers or didn't have good feedback. They did, and they are. But the Dice Tower West experience for me, specifically at Prototype Con, it had such a sort of collaborative spirit to it that everyone who showed up was just like there because they were like, yeah, there's tons of board games around. I want to play role-playing games. And I saw that you're running a playtest of your game. Tell me about it. What's it like? And like that sheer interest It's the fact that they're opting in by choice, that you didn't even have to approach them and ask them to join. They just saw you on the schedule and said, I want to go do that. It's a whole different vibe, trust me. And if you have access to that, if you have a chance to go, I highly recommend it. I don't know that that specific type of playtesting experience is available at every gaming convention. I've only been to the one, but if it's available to you, highly recommend. And that's it. Comment below about your own playtest experiences so you can get as much knowledge in one place as possible. That would certainly help other people who find this video who have no experience with it at all. Feel free to ask questions, write replies, and I'll chime in where I can if there's something that I can add too. Keep on designing, and I'll see you in the next one.